Hello and welcome to another edition of All Angles. I'm Jodianne Quarry, sitting in for Dion Jackson Miller. A special welcome to those of you watching online at onespotmedia.com. We've been hearing stories of children being abused by the very persons who are responsible for their child care and protection. Just last week, the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, Capri, published a report detailing several weaknesses in the island's state care system. From the incidents of sexual and physical abuse to children being denied access to education as acts of punishment, the issue has spanned decades and has been highlighted by Capri in their most recent report. But why has this continued over the years? Gosh, and it's been years. And who should be held accountable for these breaches? Get involved in tonight's conversation with our hashtag TVJ All Angles. This evening, we have a panel of experts who will be answering questions that you may have as to who should be held responsible and what we do now. But before that, Kalisha Williams has this overview of the Capri report.
On March 31, the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, Capri, published a report on the condition, oversight and governance of the island's state care system. Here are some of the findings. Physical and sexual abuse. Capri found that between 2006 and 2010, there were at least 500 reported cases of abuse of children in state care, many of which were perpetuated by staff. In 2017, the average age for intercourse for children in state care was 11 years old. Also, of a sample of 60 girls, approximately a third tested positive for STDs.
There have also been reports that children are being denied access to education as punishment for poor behavior.
In trying to identify the source of these issues, here are some of the weaknesses Capri found in the system. Firstly, many of the child care and protection agencies sit across multiple ministries with no regular multi-agency meetings to allow for collaboration. Lack of resources. In 2010, 4 psychologists were serving more than 4,000 children in care. Capri said foster care parents receive $16,000 every 2 months. Now to monitoring and oversight. The report said there is no independent body that holds the Child Protection and Family Services Agency accountable. There are no structured follow-ups on children who transition out of state care annually, so there is no way to measure whether institutional care is effective.
There is also a failure to partner with civil society organizations to reconcile the limited resources that we mentioned earlier. There's limited representation of civil society on strategic bodies, and also research showed that the private homes in particular are forced to depend on volunteers and international organizations for support. Now, while this is useful, it does mean that the quality and frequency of care that children receive is inconsistent.
Now to the recommendations. Capri said the Adoption and Child Care and Protection Acts should be amended. The United Nations Guideline on Alternative Care should be used in Jamaica's legislation. All case files should be digitized. The advisory board should be immediately convened to provide oversight. And the most vulnerable should be included on the Children's Advisory Panel. Kalisha Williams for All Angles.
Thanks, Kalisha. You have that overview now, and we're going to go into a discussion. Joining me this evening are Alexis Goff, child and adolescent therapist, Rosalie Gage Gray, the Chief Executive Officer, the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, the CPFSA, Dr. Diana Thorburn, Director of Research at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, Capri, and Diane Gordon-Harrison, the Children's Advocate. Welcome. This discussion isn't pleasant, and it comes out of the unpleasant findings of the Capri report. As Director of Research, Diana Thorburn, take us through why Capri decided such a report was important, and then what you hope to see happen as a result.
Well, thank you for having me and for giving us this opportunity to talk about the report. The report is done as one of 10 studies under a EU project that's titled Civil Society Organizations as Actors of Governance and Development. And 2 years ago, when we put the project together, we had just completed the situation analysis of children in Jamaica with UNICEF. And it was the first time that we, Capri, were doing research on children. And it was an eye-opener for us to see what the situation of children was in Jamaica. And it led to so many research questions, many of which, in part because of the timing, led to those being topics for the EU project. And one of the glaring issues that came out of the situation analysis was the systemic problems in the childcare system. So it's not necessarily a matter of one children's home or one particular agency or any particular individual, but there are systemic issues that, despite, as you said in the introductory report, despite decades of reports on these matters, we're still faced with. And we wanted to try and understand that better, understand why the systemic weaknesses persist, and see where there were policy options to reform some of these weaknesses, bridge some of these gaps. And as you would have seen in the report, a lot of it actually collates information that has already been presented. Besides the interviews, it was mainly us synthesizing over a dozen reports that have been done over the years, some going back to 2000, some more recent, that we tried to just bring it together to get a better understanding of the systemic issues. And I would say there are three main ones, some which you mentioned earlier, but governance, accountability, and the use of evidence. And we can discuss those as we go along in the program. But those are issues that we have known about for a long time. And yes, there have been some improvements. We can't deny that in many areas of the child protection system, but there's still far too much of a shortfall. And we know what the problems are. And these recommendations, many of them have been made before. And I don't want to sound cliched by saying now is the time to do it or now is the time. But I don't think that the alternative of not saying anything and simply resting backwards and saying, well, these things have all been said before, so why continue to say them, is acceptable either. I think that it's still our responsibility as civil society advocates, and particularly in our role as a policy think tank, to bring these issues to the public's attention and to policymakers' attention as well, and to try and crystallize them in a way that they're easily understandable, and we're also what the possibilities for change are, because there are prospects for change. And that's what the report tries to identify, where things can be done and where reforms and changes can be made that can lead to an improvement of the situation.
It's incredibly frustrating to me, Dr. Thorburn, that you're explaining to me that you've just put together information that already existed, information that was already in the public domain from about 2000. Alexis Goff, you are now watching Capri launch a report, Dr. Thorburn indicating that we have years of information. She pretty much says they went through the reports that we had and put them together. This is a new report in 2021, a report that chronicles the same sort of situation. What are your reactions to the Fix the Village report by Capri?
Yes, thanks, Judy, and thanks for having me. Yes, the report is, a continuation of the historical problem, as Dr. Thorburn said. Like, this is a report that, has shown again the systemic weaknesses of the childcare system. One of the things that this report does that is a bit different than other reports that we have read is that other reports have really focused focused on specific cases of abuse of children in children's homes, places of safety. But Capri's report, as Dr. Thorburn says, highlights the issues about governance and oversight structure, which hasn't been really focused a lot in other reports as much as now. And it shows, that it is seriously lacking. Jody, like you, it has been very frustrating to read this report. because it is one of many, but also because I have now been a part of some of the government working groups, right? I've gone with a team to the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child and submitted reports with promises from government over the years. And what this report kind of shows is that we haven't really made a dramatic, radical shift that is needed. And so on the ground, the reality for children and families has not been significantly changed. And so the report asks a very simple question that has been asked in many reports before, like, is a child better off when they are taken into state care, especially into residential institutions? And I think we can say safely now, after the reports that are in front of us, that no. And so there has been consensus, at least on paper, and at least by verbal consensus, that we really have to now look at deinstitutionalization and supporting children and families directly. And I hope that is something that we can focus on today, because otherwise it will be the same cycle that we have seen over the years in the past.
This deinstitutionalization that you're talking about seems rather novel for some people. This idea that children, again, are not better in state care. Dr. Thorburn, before we take a break here in the show, help us understand broadly the conclusions that the Capri report came to. You've taken a look at all that existed. What do you conclude?
Well, we know it's a universal and evidence-supported fact that children are better off in families. The first place they are best off is with their biological family. If not with their biological family, then with relatives. And there are cases where, unfortunately, that's not possible for a number of reasons. The next best option is some kind of family-based care. And this, may come as a surprise, but this is a globally acknowledged practice. And to be fair to the Jamaican system, they are trying to move towards that and proactively trying to move towards that. I think that the problem remains, though, that if the core of the system remains as it is, which is inadequately resourced, inadequately governed, inadequately monitored, and inadequately informed by evidence, we're going to continue to have weaknesses and gaps, even if we are successfully able to deinstitutionalize children. Because you can just, your imagination can just go off on what happens if you simply adjust the situation that children in state care are in from one to another without addressing some of the fundamental problems
we'll talk
that
about
we
some
have
of those
identified and that have been identified for a long time.
We'll talk about some of those fundamental problems after the break. We're taking our first break here inside All Angles. Remember to use our hashtag on social media, hashtag All Angles. Stay with us. We'll be right back.